The conference room air, usually thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and the quiet hum of ambition, had turned to stale, acrid silence. My carefully crafted presentation, the culmination of countless sleepless nights, countless cups of lukewarm coffee, and relentless, almost obsessive optimization, flickered across the massive, high-definition screen. The diagram, a beautiful, intricate web of interconnected, highly efficient microservices, pulsed with theoretical energy. Then, the voice cut through the sterile quiet like a rusty blade dragging across a chalkboard. "It's simply too resource-heavy, Olivia," Mark declared, his tone dripping with condescension, a sneering smirk stretching across his face, his arms folded defiantly across his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He didn't even bother looking at me, his gaze fixed on the projected architectural diagrams as if the very lines and nodes on the screen personally offended his rigid, conventional sensibilities. A collective, almost imperceptible sigh seemed to ripple through the room from the other engineers and project managers present, not of agreement with Mark, but of weary resignation, a silent acknowledgement of his ingrained resistance to anything truly novel. My own heart, usually a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of logic and analysis, began to pound a frantic, primitive rhythm of pure, unadulterated resolve. I felt a sudden, intense surge of heat rush to my cheeks, not from embarrassment or shame, but from a quiet, simmering fury that coalesced deep within my core. I knew, with absolute, unwavering certainty, that he was fundamentally, tragically wrong. And I knew, just as certainly, that this outright dismissal wasn't the end of my vision. Oh no, it was merely the unceremonious, yet strangely invigorating, beginning of something else entirely. Something far more impactful. I'm Olivia Geralds, and at that moment, I was a principal architect at Prism Tech, a company that, for far too long, had coasted comfortably on its past, fleeting innovations, relying on legacy systems and a stagnant corporate culture. My meticulously designed architecture for their new flagship platform wasn't just a marginal improvement over their existing, creaking infrastructure, it was a revolution. It leveraged cutting-edge, yet surprisingly efficient, distributed ledger technology coupled with asynchronous microservices, drastically reducing the computational overhead that plagued their current systems while simultaneously boosting resilience and data integrity to unprecedented levels. This design promised a level of scalability that could effortlessly handle a 10-fold, even 20-fold, increase in user traffic without so much as a hiccup, without breaking a sweat, a truly game-changing leap for our company's outdated, monolithic infrastructure that often buckled under even moderate loads. Mark, our seasoned, and by seasoned, I mean stubbornly entrenched and intellectually fossilized, lead engineer, saw any deviation from his own antiquated, monolithic system designs as a personal affront, a direct challenge to his carefully constructed domain. He thrived on maintaining the stagnant status quo, on proving new, disruptive ideas redundant or, worse, inefficient, always framing them as unnecessary risks. He was a master of bureaucratic inertia, capable of burying even the most brilliant, most impactful concepts under endless layers of risk assessments and long-term feasibility studies that mysteriously, predictably, always concluded in favor of doing nothing at all. Today, he played his hand, leveraged his political capital to squash a genuinely transformative project. And in this particular boardroom skirmish, he'd seemingly won this round. I simply nodded, a tight, almost imperceptible movement, a silent acknowledgement of his temporary triumph, then began to methodically gather my printed schematics, my meticulously organized notes, and my presentation clicker. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even meet his gaze, knowing any reactive emotion would only feed his insatiable, parasitic ego. My exit was quiet, deliberate, almost balletic in its controlled composure. The only sound was the faint rustle of papers as I slid them neatly into my worn leather portfolio. But beneath that calm, almost serene exterior, a quiet, furious storm was brewing, gathering momentum. I knew the true, unbridled potential of my architecture. I knew its inherent elegance, its robust efficiency, its sheer brilliance. And I knew, with a chilling, absolute clarity, that this dismissal was not just about my design being rejected, it was about power, about control, about a desperate, pathetic need to stifle anything that threatened his long-held, increasingly tenuous dominion. It was about much more than just code. The weeks that followed my public, utterly unnecessary humiliation at Prism Tech felt like navigating a dense, suffocating fog, each day heavier than the last. Every hallway conversation, every hushed whisper by the corporate coffee machine, seemed to carry a note of profound pity, an unspoken, patronizing tough break, Olivia, often accompanied by a sympathetic yet ultimately meaningless pat on the shoulder. Colleagues, usually quick to offer a critical word or a snide remark behind your back, now offered conspicuously patronizing nods or averted their gaze entirely, unable to meet my eyes. "It's just how Mark is," they'd mumble, as if his ingrained resistance to progress and his petty tyranny were an immutable act of nature, an inevitable force beyond anyone's control. It grated on me, not just because my carefully crafted design had been callously shelved, but because of the insidious complacency that permeated every fiber of Prism Tech, the palpable fear of challenging the entrenched, the comfortable, the utterly mediocre. This was no longer the innovative, daring company I had enthusiastically joined years ago, brimming with idealism and a desire to build. This was a stagnant, soul-crushing corporate graveyard where good ideas went to die a slow, agonizing death, suffocated by layers of bureaucratic red tape, pointless meetings, and the sheer, overwhelming weight of collective mediocrity and fear of change. But amidst that suffocating, debilitating atmosphere, a different kind of thought, a dangerous, exhilarating possibility, began to crystallize in the back of my mind. I started making calls, discreetly at first, almost furtively. Not to headhunters trawling for talent, not to direct competitors looking to poach, but to my network of true innovators, the mavericks who actually built things from the ground up, the ones who understood that genuine progress often meant challenging the comfortable, demolishing the obsolete. One name kept coming up with surprising frequency: Nova Systems. They were a nascent startup, still operating out of a cramped, perpetually buzzing co-working space in the grittier part of the city, but their ambition was electrifying, almost palpable. They were building a new kind of content delivery network, something truly disruptive, something that promised to redefine how media was consumed globally. Their technical lead, a brilliant but unassuming woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, was precisely the kind of person who saw potential where others saw only problems, an engineer whose vision extended far beyond the immediate horizon. Our first clandestine meeting, held in a bustling, anonymous coffee shop miles from Prism Tech's imposing glass tower, felt like drawing a deep, cleansing breath of fresh air after being submerged for too long. Anya listened intently, her intelligent eyes alight with understanding, not skepticism, as I described my rejected architecture in vivid, passionate detail. She immediately grasped the elegance, the inherent efficiency, the vast scalability. "This isn't resource-heavy, Olivia," she'd said, leaning forward across the small, wobbly table, her voice low but intense, a spark of shared understanding in her gaze. "This is resource-smart. This is genius." Her words were a profound balm to my bruised ego, a powerful validation I hadn't realized I so desperately craved. My formal departure from Prism Tech was met with an almost imperceptible shrug from Mark. He probably saw it as a minor win, another reckless upstart engineer sent packing, weeding out the impractical thinkers. She just couldn't handle the rigor of large-scale enterprise architecture, I overheard him condescendingly explain to a junior engineer one afternoon, his voice laced with his usual, insufferable superiority. Oh, if only he knew the irony of his words. Nova Systems was an absolute whirlwind, a chaotic, exhilarating sprint. My resource-heavy architecture, the one Prism Tech had so readily, so carelessly discarded, became the very bedrock of Nova's new flagship product. We worked with a feverish intensity one hadn't experienced in years, a collective drive that blurred the lines between day and night. The small, dedicated team, fueled by endless cups of cheap, bitter coffee and an unwavering, almost evangelical belief in our shared mission, moved at a blistering pace. I didn't just dust off my old designs, I refined them, optimized them further, pushed the boundaries of what was possible with distributed computing and intelligent caching algorithms. Every line of code I wrote, every architectural decision I made, every agonizing, late-night debugging session in the dim glow of my monitor, felt like a silent, defiant, incredibly satisfying answer to Mark's smug dismissal, a vindictive whisper of "I told you so." We embraced a fail-fast, learn-faster mentality, an agile approach that was anathema to Prism Tech's glacial processes. Mistakes were not seen as failures but as invaluable stepping stones, opportunities for rapid iteration and improvement. The energy was palpable, a current that ran through the entire team. There were moments, late at night, staring at lines of code that stubbornly refused to cooperate, when doubts would inevitably creep in. Was I just repeating the same mistakes? Was this audacious gamble on a tiny, underfunded startup truly worth leaving the perceived stability and corporate comforts of a giant like Prism Tech? But then, I'd remember Mark's sneering face, his patronizing tone, and the doubts would dissipate like smoke, replaced by a renewed, burning surge of unshakable determination. This was more than just a job, it was a crusade. Then came the first whispers. They started subtly, mere ripples in the vast, turbulent ocean of the tech industry. Analysts, usually fixated on the corporate behemoths and their quarterly earnings, began to mention Nova Systems in hushed, intrigued tones. Their new platform, launched quietly, almost stealthily, without the fanfare and bombast of a major corporate release, was demonstrating astonishing, almost unbelievable performance metrics. Unprecedented low latency, even for real-time video streaming, a prominent tech blog declared, their tone bordering on awe. Remarkable throughput even under peak load, defying conventional wisdom, another leading industry publication marveled, their skepticism melting into grudging admiration. Users across the globe began noticing the difference immediately: faster streaming, smoother interactive experiences, seamless content delivery that felt almost instantaneous. Our growth wasn't just linear, it was exponential, a hockey stick curve that defied traditional market predictions. The metrics pouring into Nova's sleek, custom-built dashboards were nothing short of jaw-dropping. Operational costs reduced by a staggering 40% compared to industry averages, higher concurrent user capacity by a factor of 5, sometimes even more. My phone, once filled with tedious internal Prism Tech meeting reminders and ignored emails, now buzzed incessantly with inquiries, not from opportunistic recruiters, but from genuinely curious former colleagues, genuine curiosity finally replacing their prior, irritating pity. "What in the world are you guys doing over there at Nova?" they'd ask, their voices tinged with a palpable blend of awe and apprehension, sensing a tectonic shift in the market. The chasm between Prism Tech's clunky, resource-hungry, and increasingly obsolete legacy system and Nova's streamlined, almost ethereal powerhouse grew wider and deeper with each passing day. The whispers turned into a roar, a crescendo of industry recognition. Competitors, big and small, started taking serious notice. Investors were practically knocking down our doors, sensing an undeniable paradigm shift. Nova Systems, once an obscure name whispered only among a niche group of venture capitalists, was rapidly becoming a formidable force, a titan in the making. And at the very heart of it all was the very same architecture Mark had so confidently, so ignorantly dismissed. My entire journey at Prism Tech had been implicitly, often explicitly, defined by a constant, unspoken battle with Mark. He was the quintessential gatekeeper, meticulously guarding his fiefdom of outdated methodologies and entrenched, inefficient practices. He saw any new idea not as an opportunity for advancement, but as a direct, personal threat to his carefully constructed domain, his sphere of influence. His arrogance wasn't loud or boisterous, it was a quiet, insidious hum, a condescending smirk that punctuated his every pronouncement, a subtle eye roll that spoke volumes. He wasn't overtly malicious, not in the way a cartoon villain might be, but his ambition was suffocatingly self-serving, his desperate need to be perceived as the smartest, most indispensable person in the room overriding any genuine desire for collective innovation or company progress. He built his entire professional reputation on tearing down others' ideas, on finding the minute flaws, on being the one who saved the company from reckless or unproven ideas, which often translated to simply ideas that weren't his. He cultivated an image of the pragmatic realist, but in truth, he was a fearful traditionalist. My own character, in stark contrast, was forged in the fire of genuine intellectual curiosity, a boundless desire to solve complex problems, and a relentless, almost artistic pursuit of elegant, efficient solutions. I believed implicitly in the power of well-designed systems, in the inherent beauty of efficiency, in the sheer satisfaction of building something robust and scalable. I was driven by a deep-seated desire to build, to create, to push the boundaries of what was technologically possible. Mark, with his limited imagination, saw my passion as naive idealism, my meticulous attention to detail as over-engineering, my unwavering conviction as a fundamental weakness. He saw my intricately detailed diagrams and meticulously calculated performance projections as mere theoretical exercises, easily dismissed by his supposed real-world experience, which often translated to simply doing things the way they'd always been done, regardless of efficacy or the emergence of superior methods. My growth throughout this grueling ordeal wasn't just technical, it was a profound, fundamental shift in self-belief and professional fortitude. I learned to trust my instincts implicitly, to validate my own work internally rather than seeking external approval, and to understand that sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in fighting every battle, but in walking away from what doesn't serve you, from environments that stifle your potential. My transformation was from a quiet, determined innovator operating within a suffocating, hostile system to a confident, unapologetic architect, leading a pioneering team, and actively shaping an entirely new paradigm for the industry. I had shed the corporate skin of Prism Tech and emerged, finally, as my true, unencumbered self. 3 months and 2 days. That's precisely how long it had been. I was deep within Nova's primary server room, a cathedral of blinking lights and humming machinery, meticulously monitoring the real-time performance dashboards. The green lines of efficiency soared across the large monitors, a mesmerizing symphony of perfectly synchronized data packets flowing through our highly optimized network, a testament to months of relentless effort. Suddenly, a chaotic, uncharacteristic commotion erupted from the outer office area, cutting through the controlled, almost meditative hum of the servers. A frantic voice, raw with desperation and disbelief, sliced through the air. Olivia. Olivia Gerald's. It was unmistakably Mark. The heavy, secure door to the server room, usually secured with biometric locks and a robust access protocol, was suddenly flung open with a violent clang against the plaster wall, sending a tremor through the floor. Standing there, utterly disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled as if he'd just been dragged through a hedge backward, sweat plastering his thinning hair to his forehead, eyes wide with a horrifying mixture of disbelief and utter panic, was Mark. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his face pale and contorted, his carefully constructed facade of superiority utterly shattered. He looked like a man who'd just witnessed his entire world crumble before his very eyes, or perhaps, whose carefully constructed empire had just been irrevocably shattered by a force he couldn't comprehend. He stared at me, then at the glowing monitors displaying Nova's astonishing, undeniable performance metrics, then back at me, his gaze flickering between the proof of his failure and the source of his undoing. His arrogance, usually so impenetrable, so deeply ingrained, had completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, unadulterated shock that bordered on terror. His jaw worked frantically, trying to form coherent words, but only incoherent gasps emerged. "Why," he finally managed to croak out, his voice barely a whisper, yet vibrating with an almost unbearable intensity, his hands gripping the doorframe as if for dear life, as if it were the only thing preventing him from collapsing. "Why is their system outperforming ours? It's utterly impossible. We invested hundreds of millions. How on earth did you do it?" He wasn't asking for an explanation of the technical intricacies of distributed ledger technology or asynchronous microservices. He was pleading for an answer to the terrifying, public unraveling of his entire professional worldview, his legacy, his very identity. In that singular, pregnant moment, he saw me not as a subordinate he'd casually dismissed, but as the architect of his profound, undeniable downfall, the quiet woman who held the terrifying answer to his public humiliation and utter failure. The answer hung in the air between us, unspoken, yet screamingly clear in the blinding light of Nova's undeniable, overwhelming success. The air crackled with the silent, thunderous weight of his realization. The profound, heavy silence that followed Mark's desperate, guttural plea was, for me, the most satisfying, most eloquent victory lap imaginable. It wasn't about cheap gloating, it was about the cold, undeniable, brutal logic of numbers and irrefutable performance metrics. Mark, the self-proclaimed paragon of efficiency and corporate wisdom, was confronted by the stark, irrefutable reality of his own colossal misjudgment, his deeply ingrained, short-sighted skepticism. He stood there, transfixed, staring at the dashboards, the vibrant green lines of Nova's unparalleled performance mocking his every past pronouncement, every sneering dismissal. He saw the live data, the millions of seamless transactions per second flowing effortlessly, the infinitesimally low latency, the truly elastic scalability, and the sheer elegance of the architecture he had so arrogantly, so ignorantly deemed resource-heavy. His face, a canvas of shifting emotions, contorted through a kaleidoscope of disbelief, incandescent anger, and finally, a dawning, terrible, crushing realization of his own professional obsolescence. Nova Systems continued its meteoric ascent, our platform quickly becoming the undisputed industry benchmark, a shining testament to what radical efficiency and genuine innovation truly looked like. Our client list grew exponentially, almost daily, drawing away some of Prism Tech's most lucrative accounts, causing their market share to visibly erode. Mark, meanwhile, became a true pariah within Prism Tech, his once powerful influence evaporating like morning mist. The whispers that had once followed me, filled with pity, now clung to him like a suffocating shroud, growing louder, more condemning with each passing day. His experience cost us not just millions, but our future, someone was overheard saying in the cafeteria, their voice laced with bitter resentment. He eventually resigned to pursue other opportunities, a polite, corporate euphemism for being quietly, unceremoniously forced out, his career effectively ended by his own hubris. For me, however, it wasn't about a petty act of revenge, it was about the profound, deeply personal vindication of a vision, a core belief. It was about proving, unequivocally, that true innovation isn't merely about cutting superficial costs or adhering to outdated paradigms, but about daring to rethink fundamental assumptions, about building lean, robust, and truly intelligent systems that are resource-smart, not just superficially resource-light. My architecture wasn't just lines of code and abstract diagrams, it was a living, breathing, thriving testament to foresight, to resilience, to unwavering conviction, and to the sheer power of believing in your own intellectual prowess, even when faced with overwhelming skepticism, cynical dismissal, and deeply entrenched opposition. It was, and continues to be, a blueprint for a better way, a more intelligent way, to build the future of technology. Sometimes, the most profound and satisfying victories aren't found in a heated argument or a grand, public confrontation, but in the quiet, undeniable hum of a system you built, silently, elegantly, outperforming everything else. Have you ever had your innovative vision dismissed, only to see it thrive spectacularly once you dared to take it elsewhere? What did you learn from that experience, and how did it shape your path forward? Share your story.